Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me on another of my interviews. Today I am talking to Gavin from Sovereign Empowerment, and we are looking at the attachment of earnings in the council tax scam. I don't really know what this is about, but Gavin said to me, this is something that we really got to get out and share. So hello, Gavin.
Hello again. Thanks for having me back.
It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you. So yeah, really anyone that's dealing with the councils with their council tax will be familiar with the attachment of earnings problem, and we're personally helping quite a few people that have run foul of this. And this is a relatively new thing for us to start challenging. And I've obviously, as with everything, this scam, it's all a scam, and we've been sort of digging in and finding out where everything's sort of what they're doing to get around the law. And what I wanted to do was share what we found recently to hopefully give you guys a framework that are also fighting the councils of how to start challenging the attachment of earnings specifically. Now, the trick to this, guys, is not to challenge the council, it's to challenge the employer. Now, obviously, you know, there are lots and lots of employers out there of different shapes and sizes, and we understand that it can be quite a delicate situation because some people get on very well with their employers and they don't want to sort of go in there, you know, all guns blazing and make threats of, you know, claims and whatnot. So we've kind of got a bit of a balance with regards to how we do it. And what we've worked out is that the best way to approach any sized employer, whether you get on with them or you don't, is to really outline the facts of the matter.
Right.
Confirm that you're in a dispute with the council, but then confirm using the law, which I'll show you exactly what's going on. And as a bare minimum, what you want is some time for them to just back off a little bit, not do anything, and then you can go and deal with the matter with the council. If you need to push a bit harder, what I'm about to show you will enable you to either sue them personally, remember everyone's liable, or bring in an employment tribunal of some sort. So what I want to do is a condensed version. I'm actually putting this together in a longer video. There's a lot more detail to it, but I want to give you the high level facts of what you should be looking for and how you then can address your employer with that. And I'm going to end with some key questions that you can put into a DSAR to kick things off with your employer. Because what that actually does, when you see what I'm about to show you, it opens up the holes. It opens up all of the flaws in the procedures that your employer hasn't followed.
Right.
I was
just going to say, can you just, for those people who are watching this completely new, can you just tell us what the attachment of earnings, what that means?
Sure, yeah. So as the council go through their completely unlawful process to get the non-existent liability order,
yes,
one of the ways they can come and enforce that judgment is with an attachment of earnings order. And so they, and this is what I'm going to expose for you, they issue an order without any judicial authority to issue the order upon the employer, where the employer feels in ignorance that they have no choice but to comply with said order, and then they deduct a certain percentage of your salary so as to pay the council tax liability.
Oh, right. So they go after your employer. So if you're, you know, work for a company somewhere, they'll go to your employer and then start taking the money that way.
Correct. It's exactly how they
very
do.
Devious.
So wrong. And when you see what I'm showing you, as with anything the council do, you've got the established case laws, you've got the established civil procedure rules, everything's in place of how these things are meant to happen, but the council like to circumnavigate all of that stuff so they can get away with the things that they do. So what I'm about to show you is what they're doing, what you can use to basically start to stop it, and then we'll finish with the DSAR questions. And then in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, I will have another template for you guys of a liability notice that you can actually serve upon the employer that officially outlines the facts and actually informs them that, you know, if they don't pay attention to this and they can't talk to you about it, that you will have no option but to come and sue them.
So how do they know who's employing you?
Well, that's the trick question, isn't it? Because I can only assume they're going to HMRC,
right,
which again is a complete breach of data protection and GDPR. But that to me is the only way they could be finding that information out, so as to then contact the employer and then do the rest of the things that they do.
Gosh.
And what we're finding is it's that it's like everything, isn't it? There's so much ignorance in the system of what the law really is. And so they just get this piece of paper that's saying you're ordered to do X, Y, Z. And their view is that they have to comply with it.
Yes.
But there's no substance to any of it.
No. It's all
And that's
smoke and
really what
mirrors.
we exactly, and that's
Yeah.
what we need to show.
Brilliant. So
So
you're going to share the screen.
let's see if I can get this going. Here we go. Now, remember, guys, I'm going to give you a condensed version. So there's actually a fair bit more to this, but I'm just giving you the main points that you can start using this as a guide to do your own research and start putting together your own complaints with your employer. Now, before I get into the actual attachment of earnings order itself, I need to kind of set the scene, because what we're really dealing with here is, forget the fact they can't even evidence these liability orders because the legal form was removed in 2003, and there's quite a few other things going on. The simple fact is the summons itself is just fake. It's illegitimate. And so by default, even if they were able to issue a legitimate liability order, it would be void ab initio. Okay, so what happens with these summonses is all of these complaints are bulk listed and given a single case number. Now, that is a big abusive process, and that is completely unlawful, and that is a very easy provable fact. And the other provable fact is that because they do that, it actually breaches this case law here. And so just as a summary with that case law, and I'm not going to read that bit word for word, I'm just going to just very quickly summarize it, simply stating that, you know, the issuance of a summons or the granting of a summons cannot be a purely administrative function. Because the claimant is laying a complaint with the court, somebody, and obviously a magistrate or someone with legal training, has to apply their mind to the matter to ascertain that the complaint has validity so as to grant the summons itself. That, by impossibility, is not happening with the council for the simple fact that they're all bulk listed and it's all automatic. And if anybody here has actually obtained that complaints list, which you can easily do that with a DSAR as an example from the council, you'll find that when you get that list, there'll be hundreds of names on this list that are all redacted, and your name will be there. And the substance of that complaint is merely your name, address, and the alleged sum that you're liable for.
So can I just ask here, because if I'm summoned to court, I want to be able to stand and represent myself. And if it's bulk listed, then when they're doing all of this and you say, hang on a minute, I want to, you can't just do this in one great big bulk. Otherwise, everybody will want to be there. It's one case in court at a time. They do that because presumably they haven't got the willpower to bring everybody in. But are you not able to sort of say, hang on a minute, I want to have my day in court?
Oh, you can. But this, again, where the scam, I mean, this is going away from the attachment of earnings order, but to answer the question, you can absolutely do that. But the problem is, and I know there's people out there that say that's not true, but that it's a fake court. It's a hired courtroom. It's a private tribunal. It's a private setting. They own and control that arena. So you go into that, they'll say, yeah, no problem at all. And we've done this, by the way, last year, guys. So, we would, the Bill of Rights, the obligation argument, quite a few different things. We even got to the point where there was so many breaches, we filed misfeasance complaints, malfeasance complaints. None of it went anywhere. And every single angle that we had to get around it, they shut it down and they shut it down. So that whole arena is just controlled. And from my point of view, it's a waste of time. There are easier ways to go and tackle it. And this is kind of what I want to show here, really.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to take
No,
you off.
it's fine. It's not a problem at all. So basically the summons is fake. Now, I'm going to show some different pieces of legislation around the Magistrate Courts rules. Now, interestingly, what you see when you look at this is the Magistrate Court Rules 1981, Section 98. Very simple. A summons shall be signed by the justice issuing it, or state his name, or be authenticated by the signature of the clerk of the magistrate's court. That does not happen at all. Anyone that's got a summons can see that, because the councils are obviously printing and issuing their own summons, which again is a huge abusive process. They will come back and say that we can do that because it's in the regulations. I'll talk about this in a few other slides time, about how the regulations are meaningless when you have case law precedent or legislation that would supersede those regulations. And notice this, the original version as it was originally made, this item of legislation is currently only available in its original format. So they're alluding to the fact that there's new legislation, okay, but we haven't quite got around to putting it in on the justice.co.uk site right now. The bottom line is that it doesn't exist, and this is what we use. Okay, so the summons are not signed, and this overrules any regulation that the council might use to say that we don't need to do that. So they all print and issue their own, and many councils actually do it with a court crest. That is a huge abusive process, completely unlawful and illegitimate. And this really brings us into this piece of legislation, very old piece of legislation, Section 78(2), and it's very, again, I'm just going to paraphrase and simplify. A council cannot operate as the justice. They cannot impersonate a court. Big problems. And that's exactly what they're doing. So, given that all complaints are bulk listed and have no substance, by impossibility, no court or council complies with the case law that I've just outlined. All liability orders, therefore, avoid ab initio, which means they have no legal effect. No council has the power to issue an order because it would be a breach of Section 78 of the Local Government Act 1888. And there's also no court. Now, I have had this also confirmed by the MOJ, but I'm just putting it in the bullet point. No court in this land, especially a magistrate court, has the authority to grant judicial authority to a council so as to issue an order. Very easy provable facts. So keep this stuff in mind, guys, when you're dealing with orders from the council. Where are they getting the authority from to make that an order that needs to be legally complied with? So this is one of the regulations that comes under the Local Government Finance Act. And again, as per the other slide, they're alluding to the fact there's changes to this. But this is really interesting. Section 35, liability orders, further provision, Section 3. And I'm just going to get to the end part. It is not to be treated as a sum adjudged to be paid by order of the court. A liability order is not to be treated as a sum adjudged to be paid by order of the court.
That sounds very powerful.
Very powerful. And no wonder they're trying to make out this thing's not legitimate anymore. So essentially what I'm trying to establish here, guys, is that you've got a completely fake summons that's bringing in a completely fake hearing so as to produce a completely fake liability order that actually in their own regulations is confirmed as not to be treated as a sum adjudged to be paid by order of the court. So there's zero validity to anything that they're doing in law. It begs the question, though, how are they doing the charging orders? And more importantly, all of these people that have been bankrupted or are in the process of being bankrupted, how are they doing that? They're doing it off the back of a liability order that doesn't exist. And as per the regulations, can't be used as a sum. So this is a big scam, guys. You know, but let's keep it back to the attachment of earnings orders. So this is the Attachment of Earnings Order Act 1971, and I've got Section 1, and this simply confirms the courts with the power to attach earnings. Only the courts can issue these orders. Now, again, I won't read this out word for word, but it's simply stating, if you look at it, nowhere in there does it mention the council tax and their attachment of earnings orders. And there's reason for this, guys. The reason this is, it's all a scam. So they can't add this stuff legitimately to any other piece of legislation. They control the rails that they run in. But when you start to take it out of the rails that they run in, this is where they start to run foul. Just as a side note, very quick one. Anyone dealing with attachment of earnings, charging orders. The way they try and get around that is they'll issue the order, and no judge or anyone with any legal training would have looked at that. It's completely administrative, and they go with an interim charging order to start with. And they give you a certain period of time to object to the order. And they're doing that on the basis that they believe and they feel, and it's true, a lot of people don't know what to do when they object. How are you objecting? This is what you do. You simply object and you request an in-person hearing with a judge. And then you put an application in for full disclosure. And again, by impossibility, the council can't comply with the order because they can't disclose anything. And then to proceed at that point, they're going to run foul of all sorts of problems, not least perjury. So they're actually fairly simple to deal with. Obviously, you do have to factor in the corruption that we will encounter with the courts and that kind of stuff. But if you know what you're doing with it, that's as simple as it needs to be for the charging orders. So back to this. This act confirms who or where these orders can be granted. Nowhere in this is the council tax. And this is where the council tax then go around these things. They create their own regulations as to how they do these things. So this is their regulation. And it says here, where a liability order has been made and the debtor against... Well, first of all, how can they be called a debtor when we've already confirmed that the sum, it's not adjudged as a debt? So this is all wrong already. against whom it was made as an individual, the authority which applied for the order may make the order under this regulation. The authority being the council are then saying in their own regulations they have the authority to make the order. But we've already just established they don't have a judicial authority, and neither is the liability order as some are judged by the court. So this is just all complete cobblers, basically. It's irrelevant. So, and if they are making orders, we're back to section 78.2. They're breaching that act. They're acting as the justice. But what I'm hopefully establishing here, guys, is there's no substance to any of this that's actually going on. And this is what you start to use to challenge it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have an attachment of earnings order. Okay, and you can see there's nothing to it. And all it is you are ordered, you are ordered, you are ordered to do these different things per their regulation. We've just established the regulation has no weight and they have no authority to order anyone to do anything. So what was happening here is the ignorance of the employer that is essentially complying with this illegitimate order. So when you start to see how it's working, you can start to expose all of this. And, you know, we've done this where we've just composed a letter to the employer and just outlined the facts. So obviously every employee is different and you would know that relationship and it would then determine how you approach it. But a simple letter outlining the facts is generally enough to start them thinking, okay, maybe there's something going on here. So as I'm saying, councils don't have the authority to issue orders. It's all a breach of section 78 of the Local Government Act. So let's go further. The Employment Rights Act 1996 states an employer shall not make a deduction from wages of a worker employed by him unless the deduction is required or authorised to be made by virtue of a statutory provision or relevant provision of the worker's contract. Well, we can already state there's going to be nothing in the contract as pertains to these orders. So then we're back to statutory provision. And it could be argued that, well, the Local Government Finance Act is the statute, but regulation isn't statute, it's regulation. That's why it's called regulation. So let's start exposing that little fact, okay? We go back to the Attachment of Earnings Order Act. In law, oh, I've got that the wrong way around. Let me just do it here. So in law, what basically happens is we have this thing called first in time, best in law. So an older piece of legislation would supersede a new piece of legislation. But given that we're not even dealing with legislation, we're dealing with regulations, the Attachment of Earnings Act supersedes the regulations that the council were using so as to obtain these illegitimate orders. And it's all based on best in time, first in law. Now, I didn't include it in here, guys, but the other thing that's applicable to this then is section 49 of the Senior Courts Act. Now, that brings in equity. And in fact, what I'll do when I finish this slide, I'll do a quick screen share again, and I'll just show you that particular act, because it basically confirms that any court in England and Wales, if you express the fact, would be in equity, okay, and that where there is conflict between the law and equity, the rules of equity would reign supreme. And we've obviously got a very clear conflict here, okay? So if I bring this to the very bitter end, these are the questions you want to be using in the DSAR. Now, this is you being obviously proactive with bringing the employer to the table, and also just kind of exposing a little bit of what they maybe should have been doing that we probably know they haven't done, so as to actually comply with the order. And so it makes it a little bit more official, shows the employee that you kind of know what you're talking about, and actually starts to expose the fact that all they've done is got a piece of paper and they've done it. This would then lead you into, depending on where you want to go, certainly an employment tribunal, but it would also start to give you grounds to put a case together to actually sue them or any individual that's actually enforcing that order. Because as I've exposed previously, this whole thing's a sham. So you've got the criminality, the abuse of process, all of that comes into play. And by default, because they're assisting the council, they would then be complicit in any suit you might want to be filing against the council because they're aiding and abetting those crimes. Okay, so do you have any questions, Richard, based on what I've just done? Because I've whizzed through that quite quickly.
Well, you have. And it's fascinating to see how au fait, of course, you are with all the regulations and the law and the legalese and all of that. I think that ordinary people, even though you have explained it and one can follow a logic that you've explained there, that by the bulk order, that shouldn't be done. It should be done by a magistrate. That the council are playing the part of the court and issuing summons, which they shouldn't be doing. I suppose ordinary people, you pointed to that, and I'm following it, and I'm thinking it's so good that there are people like you who can interpret that text, because I think if people are on their own, even though they are following it, sometimes just some of the way it's expressed is difficult to understand and to know the true meaning of it.
Let me just stop that screen share. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, did you?
No. So I was I was kind of admiring the fact that, I mean, you know exactly what you're talking about. I'm following it. Whether I could sit there on my own and go, okay, I'm going to give this a whirl, and then you see the various bits of paper. I think a lot of people need to have quite stern, strong stomachs to be able to sort of look at the frightening papers that come in with the big bold black summons and stuff, and they've really got to get to grips with the idea that what you're being given is not necessarily what it appears. And if you question these things, sometimes they're just, clearly they want to extract the money from you, so they're not going to acquiesce very easily.
Yeah, that's very true. But and that's the problem with the councils. You are either dealing with individuals that are corrupt, they know what they're doing, or you're dealing with, at the lower level, certainly, a lot of ignorance. So you've got this, and that's why I like to approach this more of an educational, rather than coming with I've started that way. You go in and you guys are crooks and this and that and blah blah blah. It doesn't really get you anywhere. Whereas I like to approach it from an educational point of view, of saying, well, look, here's the facts. This is what's really going on. Are we going to have a chat about this, or do we need to go in a different direction? Doesn't work all the time, if I'm being honest with you. I would probably say it's less than 50%. But for me, once I know where their position is, then I feel, okay, fine. Well, I'm going to go for you now. Then that's the way it is. You've decided that's happening, so that's what I'm going to do.
How do they push back then? I mean, if you're pointing out the bleeding obvious and what is technically correct and is there in legislation, what is their argument to counter what you're saying?
Oh, and people that have done this will know, their default is always, you are obligated to pay because of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, the end. It's like the answer to all questions.
Right, so they just won't move on that at all.
That's all they've got. Yeah, that's all they've got. And we actually know, we found out somebody, this was last year, by the way, but they used to work for the councils, and they let us know that they get together and they compare notes for people like us doing the things that we do, and
yes,
what's happening. And you'll see it, or we see it certainly a lot, that a lot of the responses they give are just templated, council to council, the same responses.
Yeah.
So that's all you get. So when you've got that, you kind of know, okay, we know what we're dealing with. There are some that do engage and ask a few different questions, and what we tend to see with those guys is it just kind of goes a bit quiet. Nothing's really happening anymore. And so where we're working with people like that, we tend to just sort of say, okay, well, let's just see how that plays out then. If they're quiet and everything's quiet, then maybe we don't keep poking the bear, and it's an easier life that way.
Yes.
Sorry.
So you were saying that then less than 50%. So there is quite a move. I mean, that's quite a big thing. I mean, and if half the population were able to not have a council tax bill, that would be quite something. And I mean, if it was half the population and the rest was going, hang on a minute, we want some of this action, thank you very much, especially if we're in a cost of living crisis and food's going up and all the things. Is it about momentum that we just need more and more people challenging them?
Yeah, I really do think. I mean, we were saying this before we came on air, and I was saying that, I mean, even I'm getting tired of this stuff, because it's so obviously corrupt and a scam. And I just kind of feel that if we can just expose and get people to take on board the fact that it is a legitimate scam, there's no validity to what they're doing, then just as a point of principle, just by not complying, if we did that in enough numbers, they can't take everybody to court. They can't do this stuff en masse. And even just with enough people standing, that's going to get more and more attention. And I think that's really where we need to be. And I do feel that's happening, because more and more people are definitely waking up to all the things we know are playing out on the world stage. And
And
I think
I assume that you would advise that if you're doing this, put the money aside, because if things go pear-shaped, at least you can then settle the bill as a quick get out of prison, as it were.
it's definitely, I mean, if you've got the cash to do that, obviously, many people just aren't in a position to do that. I mean, these councils are just running them over and then reversing again. I've got people that have legitimately tried to reason with the councils to come to some sort of agreement for payment plans, and their option is that they feel they have no other choice now but to fight back,
Yes.
because they're not accepting. They were legitimately wanting to pay something because that was all they could afford, but it's the councils that are saying, no, that's not good enough, you need to pay the full amount up front. And that's just ridiculous to me, because most people just can't do that anyway. So that to me says that they're intentionally looking to either get the charging orders or get these attachment of earnings or bankrupt people. That's the end goal, because why wouldn't they be more amenable to helping people?
I once had a CCJ because I couldn't pay the council tax. And what I learned from that was, in the end, they said, well, it went to court, and the court said, well, how much can you pay? And at the time, my earnings were absolutely invisible. So I was saying, well, all I can do is pay you sort of £5 a month. I mean, we're going back to the 1990s. And they were forced to accept it because that's what I could only afford. So then I learned quite quickly that actually, if a CC, I mean, nobody wants a CCJ, of course, but I realized then that as long as I offered to pay something, they were more open to it. Has that changed?
In my experience, yeah. In
Right.
fact, again, I'm not saying there aren't councils out there that are amenable to helping people, but certainly in our experience, none of them have been so far.
Right.
And there's a growing number of people now that are reaching out to us, and I'm sure this is with other groups as well, that they feel like they have no choice now. This is what they have to do and make their stand. And it's not necessarily that they're awake to everything that we maybe know is playing out. They're just in a position where I've had this kind of interaction with my council. It's all corrupted, and I just need to say no more.
Yeah.
And
And long term, that's what we do need to do,
I think,
because
yeah,
but otherwise we're just acquiescing and allowing it to continue. And I think once you're awake to all of this, you can't turn your back on it.
what is it? There's an MEP. I can't remember her name, but you might have seen a recent video going around of her in the European Parliament. And there was one thing she said, and it was that you cannot comply your way out of tyranny. And
Right.
it really hit me. And I thought, wow, that says it all. And that's it. I think, guys, that's exactly the situation we're in. Like, it is tyranny. I've just shown you how fake even the attachment of earnings order are. The question would be, why are we trying to comply? What are we trying to achieve here? Isn't this now the time that we just simply say, that's it? I'm
Yeah.
just not going to engage anymore. And
And,
so you can either just say no and not pay, or you can get into some sort of pushback in the way that I've just been showing you. Sorry.
and I think the time, I was just going to say, I think the time is gathering now, as there are a lot more people waking up to all sorts of elements of tyranny that's coming at us. And so I think over the next 2-3 years, people are going to be in much bigger numbers willing to say no, just turn their back and make these people obsolete. Because I think in the past their stranglehold was pretty secure, but I think their stranglehold is getting weaker and weaker. I mean, since the pandemic, I think people have been waking up, not just on the medical side of things, but also to a whole number of things. And channels like yours, like mine, and many others, they're slowly getting people to be empowered and realize that actually as you said, you can't acquiesce out of tyranny. You've got to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, I agree completely. And we can see it happening now. I'm not sure we've got, at the pace that they're rolling things out, I don't think we have 2 or 3 years of us doing
No, maybe
this.
not.
I think it's got to come to a head way sooner than that. And there are definitely things that are working in our favor that maybe we don't have direct control over, but certainly, the financial collapse and all the other things that are happening are definitely something that would help us. Certainly, you know, if we woke up that day and the collapse is in, and it's absolutely happening, and we can't make payments, I don't think even the council were worried about people that aren't paying the council tax, because those employees have got problems of their own at that point.
Yes. I suppose what I was getting to is that over the next however many months it will be, it's not just the council tax, but it like the ULEZ thing, the pay per mile thing that's coming down, the digital ID, as more and more people just turn around and say, do you know what? No, this is an infringement, because there's so much now.
Yeah.
That I think people will be going, yeah, okay, I'm happy to stand up against the council tax, but I'm also saying no to this and no to that and no to the other, and meeting other people, like-minded people. And in those groups, in those grassroots groups, they're learning about the other things that they can turn their back on and go, oh yeah, great. So that I think there is this momentum, and I think it will snowball.
I completely agree. And I actually think the snowball's gathering a pace now.
I
mean, I'm very hopeful. I'm not even more hopeful. I know that we win. I know it's happening. The numbers are growing daily. And if you are watching this and you're on the fence, just stand up. Just do it.
Yeah.
Nothing to lose.
We can hear the creaking.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can hear the creaking. You know, before perhaps it was the stress levels were there, but you couldn't hear it. Now I think we can hear the creaking, and the water is coming into this ship, and their ship, I should say. And I think they're going to sink.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I can't wait.
It's been a joy to catch up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. People can find you at Sovereign Empowerment. I'll leave the links in the description. And as you say, you'll have a much more detailed version of that soon. And of course, you've got all your other wonderful videos to look at. So best of luck to you. I'm sure we'll talk again, and it will be lovely. I've been meeting many of the people that I've actually interviewed in the flesh, and it's so nice to actually, you know, shake someone's hand and say, hello, how are you? So I'm sure we will do that at some point.
I'd love to. Yeah.
It really just it solidifies all of us on this side of truth.
Absolutely. So, I'd love to. No, thank you very much, and thanks for watching, guys.
So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching, and do check out all the other interviews that I've got coming up. Check out Gavin's website, and I'll be back with more very soon. Till next time, goodbye.